Hi everyone, it's Molly from Pen Up Studio. So after a bit of a break, I'm back with another coloured pencil tutorial. So today I'll be drawing two kookaburras and I'll be drawing as well a little bit of a wooden post and some barbed wire as well. So I'll talk you through the supplies I'll be using and then we can get started. For drawing these birds today, I'll be using mostly Polychromos coloured pencils, which are by Faber-Castell. Now, these are probably my all-time favourite pencils for drawing most things, but these are my absolute favourite for wildlife, birds, and all that fine detail. Some others I'll be using are the Caran d'Ache Luminance, and these are another amazing pencil. I will usually use these for more of the final layers because they are thicker lead and doesn't hold a fine point as well as the Polychromos. And the other one is the Derwent Drawing, and mostly in this one I'll just be using the white because it is the most opaque white out of all coloured pencils I've ever tried. Okay, and now I'll talk about the other supplies. So another important part of my supplies is odorless solvent. It is a mineral spirit, sort of like a not so toxic version of terps. So it does smell though, so you've got to be careful. So I keep it in this little clear liquid in an airtight container, and I will put a little bit on my brush and use it to dissolve some of the coloured pencil. So I'll usually use this not so much on wildlife, maybe on the final layers, because when it dissolves the pigment it can mush all your details together. But one good thing is it does help with the saturation in making all your colours a lot more bright. So yep, and now for the paper. I will be using Arches hot pressed watercolor paper, 300 grams, and the size I'm working is A3 or about 12 by 16 inches. Yeah. So on to the tutorial.
So I first trace my outline by putting my paper up against the screen over my reference photo and drawing out the outlines and just the main details. So I'm starting with my Polychromos, and I first laid down my lightest colours and then my mid-tones, and then I'll be going over with my dark. So there is a dark warm grey in the Polychromos. I am putting in the spring, and I'm going back over with my Caran d'Ache Luminance for the highlights. And I've got a little Tombow mono eraser to get rid of any excess lines. So I'm using Polychromos now, and I have got very, very sharp pencils, especially for the outside, to make nice crisp lines, to make it look realistic, because, well, it's made out of metal and metal doesn't have fuzzy lines. So I'm mainly using Polychromos. I'm going through and just blocking in my lights and then working down to my dark areas. And if you saw a bit of blue there, I was using a bit of the light cobalt blue in the Caran d'Ache Luminance, because just to make it a bit more cool. So I'm using mostly warm colours for the post. So when I was drawing these posts, you really had to turn your brain off and watch the reference photo. So that's what my reference photo looks like. So you can see what I'm sort of going for. Yeah, you've really just got to stop and just let your hand just copy the reference photo, or you're going to end up with a very strange looking post, which is what I didn't want. Or staying on the moss, I'm using the Polychromos light green. It's like a light browny green. And then I'm going through with some Caran d'Ache Luminance to put in the shadows. So I'm usually work light to dark, and then just going through with my Polychromos black, which is the darkest black I've ever worked with, for the darker shadows. So I haven't used any odorless solvent at this point. I found you've really got to be careful. I tend to overuse it a bit. So just use it sparingly. And just light layers, and I'm going through. I only burnish the final layers with the Derwent Drawing Chinese White. So there I'm working light to dark again, and as just watch the reference photo for those shadows to get the lighting right on the post, and so then it lines up and works with the lighting on the kookaburras, because that's something I tend to do. Looks like you've got two different light sources and it looks a little weird. So blocking in where all the mossy bits go, and then I tend to fill it in with some mid-tones and then go back through my shadows. So just watching your reference photo, it's always good to look, a good rule is to look at your reference photo more than your drawing itself, which sounds a bit weird, but you've really got to do it if you really want it to make it look really realistic. So I'm adding a few other colors, a bit of blue into the post in the deeper shadows, a bit of purple, a bit of brown. You've always got to put in other colors, and in the shadows especially, and as there's always reflected colors in everything you see, even though you may not see it if you're staring at something, but it is there. And it always helps to make things look more realistic. Obviously don't go overboard and make a pink post, but you can always put a little bit in just to make things look a bit more interesting. So starting with the eye of the kookaburra, this is my black polychromos. So I've gone through and put in the pupil, and now I'm going around on the outside, just sharpening up so I know where the outline of the eye is. Now when you put in the pupil, don't make it a big round blob, because there's usually a highlight covering part of it. And once you cover that in, it is almost impossible to get that bright white back in, because that is probably the brightest part on any drawing or portrait, whatever you're doing, is the highlight in the eye. So I've gone through with some brown, because there's the pupil, the dark bit around the eye, and then there's usually some lighter bit just below the pupil, and that's where you can really see the color of the actual eye. So what I just did there, I have a big mop brush, which is a big fluffy, so it's like a makeup brush almost, and I use that to get rid of any pencil bits that have fallen onto the drawing, and that helps so I don't smudge that with my hand. Okay, so starting on the beak, I've gone through and put my nostril in with the black polychromos, and I'm using a dark brown, and I've put in the line in the beak. So the kookaburras have got some grey bits on the beak and then some pink as well, so you've got to put that in. So I'm using a light flesh sort of tone from the polychromos. I'm sharpening my pencil. Always very important. I always tend to not sharpen it enough, and it is almost, you have to do it when you're doing things realistic. So, learn from my mistakes. Always sharpen your pencils. So, I'm putting in the little ridges in the beak, because especially kookaburras' beaks, they're not just a nice round beak. They've got ridges, they've got little dips, they're natural. So you've got to get all those little bits and pieces in to make it look correct. So there's starting on the silver bit. And I've started with my light colours, working down to my darker colours. So I've sped it up a little bit here for you. And now working on the brown bits. So there's white and there's brown bits on the kookaburra, so you've got to make sure you get them in the right spot. And I usually go through with my light colours, block it all out, and then with a mid-tone darken a bit more up. And then I'll go to my darkest, and then usually burnish a bit more over with my lighter colours. So white. Oh no, I'm working on brown now. So I've got very sharp pencils to get those feathery bits in on the top of the head. So working on white. Now, always got to be very careful. Once you go over the top, you can never go back. But then also, don't leave everything white. You've got to put those shadows in there. And white reflects colours around it. So there's always going to be brown, a bit of blue, a bit of green if it's a white dog sitting on green grass. Okay, so I'm blocking in all my feathers. This was very fiddly. So you've just got to look at the reference photo, slow down, and just copy what you see. So I've used the light copper blue again for the wings, and then I'm going through and darkening it up. So Kookaburra feathers are light on the outside, and then they're darker in the middle, which is a bit painful. So I've gone through with one color line and just made a bit of a map, and then going through with my darker tones and leaving that white bit on the outside, or a lighter bit around the edge. So I'm blending this with my odorless solvent. So what I've done is I've just gone it very carefully, and then now I'm burnishing with my white, Chinese white, and then I've gone through and toned it down a little bit with Polychromos, a light brown, just so it doesn't look very, very bright and a bit weird. One thing I found, when you burnish with the Chinese white, it always tends to look a little blue. So especially when you're drawing brown things, it can look a bit weird. So you've got to go through and just like a light glaze over the back, over the top, and tone it down a bit. So tail feathers, I went through first and put my black bits light with like a dark grey, and just blocked in where my shadows and where the black bits are. And then I had to be very careful to stop the brown partway down the tail, so then the white bits can show through. So doing the same thing with this kookaburra. I've done the same thing with the eye, pupil, outside, left the white bit and the highlight, and then doing the same thing with the beak, pink bit down the bottom, grey bit at the top, nostril line, ridges, the beak. So I put a bit purple in there. And then I'm going through putting the brown in the beak, in the eye, and then there's a little dark bit around the eye. So that is a nice light reddy brown, and in the Polychromos that I've went through and blocked that all in. And then I'm going with my darker colours. And then there's my Chinese white again, burnishing. And then now I'm starting on the white. So as you can see, I'm going through, there's a fair bit of shadows in there. I'm using a dark or a mid warm brown in the Polychromos, and now I'm going through, I've done a bit of a line, and make sure you don't do that too dark. I've done that, you end up like a black outline. It looks a bit like a cartoon. So just very light lines when you're blocking it in, so if you get it wrong you can always erase it. And so I'm going through this is a light brown or light grey brown, and just very lightly blocking everything in. So I'm going through a bit and putting a few more shadows in, and then I'll go through some dark colours, put the darkest bits in, and for the wing I'll just be doing the same thing. Make sure I get the blue in the right area, make sure I get those white bits on the feathers, blend it with odorless solvent, and then putting the white bits over the top and then glazing it. Yep, darker shadows, and there is my finished piece.